This now brings us to the second Jewish objection, that it does not prophesy a virgin birth because it doesn't use the Hebrew word for virgin, it uses another word, namely Alma. Now, does Alma in itself mean virgin? No, it doesn't. But can it? Yes, it can. Because when translated, it means a young maiden who is of age to marry, yet is not married. In particular, it refers to a young woman coming into puberty and has to do with youthfulness and not virginity. The word Alma in the singular appears 4 times in the Hebrew Bible. Firstly, in Genesis 24:43, speaking of Rebekah. Secondly, in Exodus 2:8, speaking of Moses' sister. Thirdly, in Proverbs 30:19, speaking of the way of a man with a young woman. And fourthly, in Isaiah 7:14, as we saw of Emmanuel's mother. Now let's examine these verses. Genesis 24:43 says, "Behold, I stand by the well of water, and it shall come to pass, that when the virgin cometh forth to draw water, and I say to her, Give me, I pray thee, a little water of thy pitcher to drink." This is in reference to Abraham's chief servant relaying to Rebekah's family the sign that God had given him success in choosing a wife for his master Abraham's son Isaac. We know Rebekah was a virgin not only because we reason so, because of Abraham's right standing with God and given the ethical standards of the time, but it explicitly says so several verses before in the same chapter. For it says, "The woman was very beautiful, a virgin, no man had ever slept with her." The second reference in Exodus 2:8 says, "Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go ahead." So the girl, or the Alma, went and called the child's mother. The girl in this passage is Miriam, the sister of Moses. She is referred to with the Hebrew Alma, and both Jewish commentators and the historian Josephus speak of her as being only 10 or 12 years of age. Although women did marry early in the biblical period, it doesn't seem logical to believe she was anything but a virgin at this point in the narrative. Then we have Proverbs 30:19, which says, "There are 3 things that are too amazing for me, 4 that I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a snake on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, and the way of a man with a young woman." It's evident in all these instances where the term Alma is used, it means a young, unmarried woman. Alma is never used in the Hebrew scriptures to describe a young woman who is married at that time. And also, given the ethical Jewish standards of that time, we reason she is a virgin. In fact, one does not need to go back that far. One just has to go back 100 years ago, when women of marriageable age in Western countries were expected to be chaste, let alone going back 2,700 years ago in ancient Israel. If a Jew argues this fact, then he is violating the integrity of his own Bible and the Jewish ethical standards expected at that time, and is in essence implying that it was the norm for young Jewish girls of marriageable age then to be promiscuous. So it's absolutely foolish to presume that Alma doesn't imply virgin. Many Jews argue that Isaiah should have used the name Betula if he meant virgin in itself. The Hebrew word Betula, however, unless it is in a legal context having to do with virginity, does not mean virgin. It means maiden, and the context of the aspect of womanhood it is referring to has to be explained. When the Bible talks about young men and young women, it talks about young men and betulot, not young men and virgins, but young men and young women. The Hebrew scripture speaks of 2 types of betulot. One is the true virgin, and the other is the betrothed virgin, or the betula morasha. We see an example of this in Deuteronomy 22, where the virgin in a state of betrothal is referred to as the man's isha, or wife, since the state of betrothal was considered just as serious and sacred as the married state. This seems to argue against betula having the singular meaning of virgin. In Genesis 24 verses 15 to 16, Rebekah is referred to with the term betula, but note carefully that this is immediately followed with the phrase, "Neither had any man known her." Now, if betula unquestionably was understood to mean virgin, then why would it have been necessary to add, "Neither had any man known her"? Joel 1:8 uses the word betula in a context which does not convey the usual meaning of virginity. It says, "Mourn like a virgin," or a betula, in sackcloth, grieving for the husband of her youth. Now, what's interesting here is that the verse uses the Hebrew Baal in reference to the husband. And in the Hebrew scriptures, Baal never refers to a betrothed man, only a married man. This, together with a simile, like a virgin, argues that the context of Betula here refers to a married woman. So we can see that there are problems defending the accusation that the use of Alma as virgin is a Christian mistranslation. It also seems that the argument that the prophet Isaiah would have used Betula if he was referring to a virgin does not hold up well to scrutiny. In fact, one could argue that if Isaiah had used the word Betula, then critics might have had much more ammunition to argue that he is not referring to a miraculous virgin birth. Arguing over the choice of word is pointless, as the essence is the same. It would be just as foolish as arguing today over the word bachelor, unmarried man, single man, and getting all scholastical about whether it means a man who was never married, someone who was once married and now divorced, someone who was once married but now widowed, or someone who is currently in a relationship but not married, or whatever. Regardless of any of these, the essence is the same. Bachelor, single, unmarried, widow, all means a man who is currently not married. The truth is that when someone is not open to accept truth, they retaliate and concern themselves with the scholasticism of word interpretation rather than with the essence of truth. And when people get so tied up in the semantics of things, they then miss the essence. We now come to the last aspect of examining this issue, known as textual criticism. The process of textual criticism is taking the available ancient manuscripts, regardless of the language they're in, whether it be in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, and comparing them in order to try and determine the original reading of a certain passage. We shall look at three versions of the text: the Masoretic, the Isaiah scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Septuagint. The Old Testament that we use today is translated from what is called the Masoretic text. The Masoretes were Jewish scholars who between 500 and 950 AD gave the Old Testament the form that we use today. Until the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947, the oldest Hebrew text of the Old Testament was the Masoretic Aleppo Codex, which dates to AD 935. The Great Isaiah Scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls is the oldest complete copy of the book of Isaiah known. It dates between 100 BC to about 70 AD, so it's about 2,000 years old. So this manuscript predates the Masoretic text by about 1,000 years. The Septuagint is a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. It was translated by ancient Jewish rabbis. It is dated about 250 years before Jesus Christ, so it's about 2,000 years old. And it can be argued that a complete Hebrew text from which this Greek translation would be derived must have existed prior to the 3rd century BC. Now we can reason that the older a text is, then it is more likely to be closer and more accurate to the original. Therefore, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint would be more reliable sources. Also, it would be more trustworthy to trust a text compiled by Jews living hundreds of years before Jesus was even born, rather than a text compiled by Jews living 900 years after Christianity spread as a religion. When we compare Isaiah 7:14 in these manuscripts, we notice three differences. The differences are in, firstly, the name of God that's used; secondly, the word used to denote a virgin; thirdly, the pronoun used regarding who called the child's name Emmanuel; and fourthly, in the name Emmanuel itself. Now the King James Version reads, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." The Masoretic Hebrew text reads, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a maiden shall conceive and bear a son, and she or you will call his name Emmanuel." The Isaiah scroll reads, "Therefore Yahweh himself will give you a sign. Behold, a maiden shall conceive and bear a son, and he will call his name Emmanuel." And the Septuagint reads, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you will call his name Emmanuel." Now the Greek Septuagint always translates Adonai and Yahweh as Kyrios. The Septuagint also takes alma to mean virgin here, as it writes the specific Greek word for virgin, which is parthenos, and not the Greek word for a maiden. Now the question one needs to raise here is, what motivation would the Jewish rabbi translators of the Septuagint have had to write virgin and not young maiden in the Greek, 250 years before Jesus even came on the scene?